Welcome to the second day of our international conference. Today's topic centers on the contemporary issues and trends in sociology, public policy, and women's studies. My name is Farah Zahira Zahra, and I will be the moderator in this session. Today, we have invited two outstanding speakers. The first is Professor Syed Farid Alatas from the National University of Singapore, and Mr. Rizwanda, PhD, a lecturer at University of Sultan Agam Tayasa. Before we start the presentation, I would like to lay out today's guide. First, to all participants, I would like to remind you to continue mute your audio throughout the presentation in order to avoid any disturbances during the presentation later. And if you have any questions, the discussion sessions will be conducted later at the end of each presentation. Secondly, to the presenter, you will have 45 minutes to present and 25 minutes for the discussion session. And as the reminder of time, we'll have to interrupt you while you are presenting to let you know that you have 5 minutes left and if your time is up. Now, let's invite the first keynote speakers of the day, Professor Syed Farid Alatas, with the topic of presentations on contemporary issues in research and social sciences. Professor Syed Farid Alatas is Professor of Sociology at the National University of Singapore. He also headed the Department of Malay Studies at NUS from 2007 until 2013. He lectured at University of Malaya in the Department of Southeast Asian Studies prior to joining NUS in the early 1990s, and he was a research associate at the Women and Human Resource Studies Unit, University Science Malaysia. Professor Alatas has authored numerous books and articles, including Ibn Khaldun, Applying Ibn Khaldun, The Recovery of Lost Traditions in Sociology, and Sociological Theory Beyond the Canon, The State of Feminist Theory in Malaysia, and Feminism, Malaysians' Reflections and Experience, Special Issues of Kajian Malaysia, Journal of Malaysian Studies. His areas of interest are the sociology of Islam, social theory, religions and reform, intra and interreligious dialogue, and the study of Eurocentrism. Without further ado, let's start the presentations. Professor, the time is yours.
Thank you very much for the introduction. Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Dr. Ali Nurdin, Dean of the Faculty, Dr. Asep Iqbal, convener of the conference, ladies and gentlemen. The title of my presentation, well, the theme of my presentation, of course, is very broad. It's about contemporary issues in social sciences, but specifically, I want to talk about the importance of what we call autonomous knowledge or autonomous social science, or what is called in our language ilmu mandiri, autonomous knowledge. Now, to discuss this, we need to discuss two issues. One is the state of the social sciences, which is in a state of which is affected by the problem of Eurocentrism, and the other is what is our response to the problem of Eurocentrism. So we find that in much of the global South or in the third world, certainly in Indonesia, in my country, Malaysia, and other countries in the region, the social sciences are still in a state of intellectual dependence or academic dependency or what we call kebergantungan intelektual. This is a state of dependency on institutions and ideas, mainly from a few knowledge centers in the West, not all Western institutions, but a few knowledge centers in the West. The United States, United Kingdom, and France, to some extent, Germany, to some extent, the Netherlands, to some extent, Australia. But generally, the dependence on ideas and institutions for the development of our social sciences is on the UK, the US, and France. Now, in this state of dependence, our scholars find themselves to be, or rather we find our scholars to be captive minds. Now, this is a concept that was developed by my late father, Syed Farid Alatas, who spoke of the captive mind, or we say in Malay, minda tertawan, or I think in Bahasa Indonesia you say minda terbelenggu. Now the problem with the captive mind is that it accepts theories, concepts, ideas, research agenda from the West without problematizing them, without critiquing them. So there's a one-way relationship with the West. So for example, the Western scholars on Indonesia or Western scholars on Malaysia are read in Indonesia, in Malaysia, for their theories, not only for their empirical research, but also for their theories. And we apply their theories to our research. But we, in our part of the world, we the work that we do is not read theoretically by scholars in the West. And for the most part, we don't even generate theoretical works. So we apply their theories, Western theories of American anthropologists, theories of French sociologists, and so on. But the scholars in the West are not generally applying the theories, the concepts that emerge from our part of the world. And I think we can see the problem very well when we realize that, let's say, if you take Indonesian studies, if you take Indonesian history, sociology, or anthropology, the most famous concepts that have emerged from Indonesia, from the study of Indonesia, were not created by Indonesians. I'm referring to the concepts of abangan, santri, priai. I mean, these are Indonesian words and they come from Indonesia, but they were not identified as social science concepts, as anthropological concepts by the Indonesians themselves. They were identified outside and then popularized, and then they became an important feature of Indonesian studies, especially anthropology and sociology, and of course history. So you can, from that example, you can see the extent of intellectual dependence that we have on the knowledge centers in the West. So basically, we can say that the trait of Eurocentrism is that the ideas, let us say that there are two main traits of Eurocentrism, that the ideas and thinkers, the local ideas and local thinkers are marginalized in the sense that they are not seen as sources of concepts and theories. For example I always like to give for my own field of study. I'm interested in Ibn Khaldun, and I noticed that most of the studies on Ibn Khaldun are empirical studies, and that it is very rare that scholars, Western or non-Western, try to apply Ibn Khaldun's conceptual framework to the study of Islamic history. So Ibn Khaldun is seen as a source of information, and he's also seen as a source of theory, of abstract theory, but there is little attempt to apply his theoretical framework to the study of North African or Middle Eastern history. In other words, when scholars look for theoretical frameworks to study Islamic history, the theoretical frameworks come from their own civilization. They apply the theories of Karl Marx, Max Weber, and other scholars. So Ibn Khaldun himself is not seen as a source of theory to be applied. You look closer to our own region. When we teach anthropological theory or when we teach social theory, we are almost never interested in José Rizal. José Rizal was an important theorist of colonial society. He lived in the 19th century during the same period of the formation of the social sciences, during the same period as Karl Marx, Max Weber, Harriet Martineau, Emile Durkheim, and others, who were all theorizing about the new modern society. But yet, although we are in Indonesia, we are in Malaysia, we are very near to the Philippines, and we share so much common history with the Philippines, yet we have no interest at all in José Rizal as a social theorist. Come closer to home, one of the most important thinkers who gives us a different perspective on colonial society in the 19th century was Raden Ajeng Kartini, but yet her works have not been developed as social theory, and she's not taught as a social theorist. She does not appear in books on social theory, even in Indonesia, even in Malaysia. So we have this problem of intellectual dependence, and this is an important feature of Eurocentrism, the neglect or the marginalization of local ideas and thinkers. And another example that I'd like to give, and this has to do with language, that because we are not thinking about local concepts, because we think that concepts from the West are the universal scientific concepts, and we don't realize that all concepts are local. Even Western concepts are local in their own context, but they became universalized. They were developed as social science concepts and they became universalized. And we are not conscious that the same thing should happen in our own context. And part of the problem is that we don't take our language seriously. For example, if we look at Malay, Indonesian language, there are many terms and many words which point to important concepts. Let me just give an example. Maybe I just say in bahasa, because it's easier, because we're talking about language. Satu garis pemisah, yang saya maksudkan dengan garis pemisah adalah dikotomi, ya. satu garis pemisah yang penting dalam kajian mengenai sejarah Eropah adalah kota dan desa, town and country, ya, kota dan desa. Sebab sejarah Eropah adalah sejarah pertentangan antara kota dan desa. Pertentangan itu antara kota dan desa, pertentangan antara kelas sosial yang ada di kota, seperti kelas pedagang dan kelas bourgeois, dengan menentang kelas sosial yang ada di desa, seperti kelas bangsawan, kelas aristokrasi, ya, adalah pertentangan yang mewujudkan zaman modern, zaman kapitalis, masyarakat kapitalis, ekonomi politik kapitalis dan sebagainya. Jadi garis pemisah ini, dikotomi ini merupakan dikotomi yang sangat penting dalam sejarah mereka, dalam kajian sejarah mereka, dan dalam pelbagai bidang seperti antropologi dan sosiologi. Tetapi kalau kita menerapkan garis pemisah itu dalam pemikiran kita mengenai sejarah kita sendiri, itu akan mengarah ke pemutarbelitan sejarah kita. Sebab garis pemisah yang lebih penting bagi kita di rantau Nusantara ini adalah bukan kota dan desa, tetapi laut dan darat. Sebab laut adalah air adalah sesuatu yang sangat penting dalam kehidupan ekonomi, politik dan sosial kita. Ya, sebab itu di semenanjung Malaysia kita ada istilah laut dan darat, orang laut dan orang darat, ya. Dan orang laut itu mempunyai peranan dalam sejarah yang sangat penting. Contohnya pada zaman Kesultanan Melaka, orang laut membekalkan kuasa militer kepada Sultan Melaka, dan mereka mendiami laut juga, ya. Laut bukan sekadar berfungsi sebagai alat komunikasi, ya, tapi mereka mendiami laut, mereka tinggal di laut seperti pengembara, ya. Mirip masyarakat yang mengembara di pasir di Timur Tengah, ya. Masyarakat mengembara. Dalam teori Ibn Khaldun ada perbedaan antara masyarakat mengembara yang mengeliling, ya, masyarakat nomaden, dibandingkan dengan masyarakat yang menetap di kota dan di perkampungan. Begitu juga di rantau Nusantara ada masyarakat mengembara di laut, dan yang mempunyai sistem ekonomi yang tersendiri, yang agak unik. Itu harus dibandingkan dengan masyarakat yang menetap di darat. Dan di darat juga ada perbedaan antara hulu dan hilir, ya. Jadi maksud saya perbedaan antara kota dan desa itu, atau garis pemisah itu, dikotomi itu tidak sesuai untuk kita memahami masyarakat kita dan sejarah kita sendiri. So I was saying that the town-country distinction, which is a basic part of European history, town-country or city and countryside. This is a basic distinction in European history because the whole of European history, of modern history, is determined by the conflict between the town and the country, between the classes in the town, the trading class, and the aristocratic or nobility class in the countryside, and that conflict, which developed over centuries, eventually resulted in revolutions and in the rise of modern Europe, in the rise of modern capitalist Europe. But we cannot apply this to our part of the world because for us, the more important distinction, especially in our history, is between sea and land. That's why, as I mentioned earlier, we have this distinction between sea people and land people, orang laut and orang darat. Yeah, and the sea actually is a political economy of its has a political economy of its own. It has its own economic system. In addition to the economic systems that we have on land. I'm talking about pre-modern times, yeah. And the people who live on the sea, what we call orang laut, of course, they're not really orang. They don't call themselves orang laut. They have their own names. You know, the Bajau and the Lanun. Of course, we use the term Lanun to mean pirates, right? And we use it as a bad word. But the Lanun, of course, were community, and they were living. Many of them were living on the sea, in the Bajau also, they provided the military force. Many of the sea, the groups that lived on the sea, that we call the orang laut, provided the military source for the sultans in the areas, for example, the Malacca Sultanate. So I think we must look at our own reality and look at our own language to see our language as a source of ideas, as a source of concepts. Yeah, you know, we say that, as I always try to say, kita harus melihat bahasa kita sebagai khazanah, konsep untuk ilmu-ilmu kemasyarakatan, sebagai khazanah, sebagai penyimpan konsep. Ya, jangan kita melihat pada bahasa kita hanya sebagai alat untuk menerjemahkan sesuatu dari bahasa Inggris ke bahasa Indonesia atau bahasa Malaysia. Ya, jangan hanya sebagai alat terjemahan. Ya, sebab setiap perkataan itu mengandungi kemungkinan untuk mewujudkan konsep yang baru. Ya, contohnya, the example, good example is merantau, migration. We use migrasi, but in Malay, we have many words which refer to different types of movement, different types of migration, right? So merantau is one, berhijrah is another, mengembara is another, and then there are many other such words you can find throughout, you know, Nusantara. And each of these words refers to a different concept of movement of people, a different concept of migration. So, for example, in the past, if somebody moves from Palembang to Johor Bahru, or to Negeri Sembilan in Semenanjung, Malaysia, they say that he merantau or she merantau, dia merantau, ya. Tapi kalau dia berpindah dari Palembang ke Istanbul atau ke Damsyik atau ke Makkah, itu dikatakan dia berhijrah, ya. Because merantau means to move, but to move within the same cultural area. But when you move outside of the cultural area, then it's not merantau anymore. So that's why we need to look at language as a source of ideas, to take our language seriously. Now, sometimes, I mentioned one of the traits of Eurocentrism is the marginalization of ideas and concepts, or the marginalization of local ideas and concepts, ya, peminggiran gagasan, konsep dan pemikir yang lokal. The second trait is that sometimes the concepts from the West that are applied to our own societies result in the distortion of our realities. The wrong understanding of our realities. One of the I think good examples in our part of the world, especially in Indonesia, we speak about Hindu Bali, then Hindu Jawa. But what is interesting is that the conceptualization of a religion called Hinduism is actually very much a Eurocentric construction. That in the 16th century, for example, in the 16th century, when the Dutch would refer to the Balinese as Hindus, in India itself, there wasn't really a religion called Hinduism. There were actually many different religions. The word Hind or Hindu did not refer to a religion. The word Hind, of course, comes from Arabic, and it was used by the Arabs or by the Muslims to refer to the area that we call India. But when Al-Biruni, Abu Rayhan Al-Biruni, the scholar from Uzbekistan, from Khwarazm, which is now in Uzbekistan, in the 11th century, 10th century, when he went to India, he spent 13 years in India to study the religions of India. He never noted that there was a religion called Hinduism. What he saw was many religions. But it's the Europeans that generally classified all of these different religions under one category, and they called it Hinduism, not the Hindus themselves. So this idea of Hinduism as a single religion was also adopted by the scholars and by the travelers and by the colonial officers who came to Indonesia. So here you see that you have a European construction of a religion, which is then applied to our reality, and then it's accepted by us, and it's a distortion of reality. So these to me these are the two main traits of Eurocentrism. Dua ciri utama Eurocentrisme. Yang pertama, peminggiran konsep dan pemikir lokal, dan penguasaan secara intelektual oleh konsep dari Barat. Itu pertama. Yang kedua, pemutarbelitan kenyataan kita, pemutarbelitan realitas kita disebabkan oleh penerapan atau aplikasi teori dan konsep dari Barat. So I think it is clear that what we need to do is to think seriously about tradition, about all the different non-Western traditions as sources of ideas and concepts in the social sciences and humanities, which also means taking seriously language as a source of concepts. So if we speak about our own region, we speak about the Malay-Indonesian archipelago, we speak about the Malay language, as well as other languages of the region, and I don't exclude the languages of the communities that originate from outside. For example, in Malaysia we have communities that are very integral, important parts of our culture and religion and civilization, but they originate from from India, from China, from the Middle East, from other parts of the world. But they are part of us now. Their languages also, for example, Tamil, the different dialects of the Chinese, Hokkien, Cantonese, of course, Mandarin itself. These are all part of our society. And their ideas and their concepts are also to be considered as local. But my point is that the thinkers and the concepts, the local ideas, the local concepts must be taken seriously, and we must start to engage in the job of reconstruction of these ideas. So, for example, I mentioned Kartini, I mentioned Jose Rizal. How can we construct a social theory based on the ideas of Kartini or based on the ideas of Rizal? In other words, what is Kartini's understanding of the nature of the human being? What is Kartini's understanding of the conflict among human beings? What is the understanding of the main problem of society? In her case, of course, colonial society. Does she adopt a class perspective? Does she adopt a gender perspective? What is the notion of progress of society? What is the notion of the role of religion in progress? These are the kinds of questions that we need to ask in order to reconstruct the ideas of Kartini into a kind of social theory. And we can do the same thing for Jose Rizal. We can do the same thing for Pramudia. Pramudia is a very important thinker. In fact, his as has been recognized by scholars like Max Lane, who is the most important, not only the most important translator of Pramudia, but also one of the most important commentators on Pramudia's work. Pramudia's novels are actually reinterpretations of Indonesian history, but little has been done in terms of the reconstruction of Indonesian history based on Pramudia's work. And in reality, indeed, Pramudia's works should be taught everywhere in the region, because he's not simply an Indonesian writer. He's a writer of our region. He's an anti-colonial writer. He's an anti-colonial thinker. We can say that his work constitutes a response to colonial ideas. So he should be an important personality, an important figure when we talk about the decolonization of knowledge. Penyah jajahan ilmu is an important figure in this. So this brings me to the conclusion that when we identify the problem of Eurocentrism, and we speak about the need for looking at our tradition, looking at our language, looking at local scholars and thinkers, looking at local ideas to construct new theories and to engage in original research. What we are talking about is what my father referred to as the need for an autonomous social science tradition. And in fact, we can say that in the Malay world, we have seen the emergence of a school of social science, which has been called the School of Autonomous Knowledge, atau dalam bahasa Indonesia, bahasa Malaysia, the Sekolah Ilmu Mandiri, Sekolah Ilmu Mandiri ini berasal daripada pemikiran dan penelitian Syed Alatas yang menyeru supaya suatu tradisi mandiri dalam penghasilan ilmu diwujudkan ya di Asia, terutama sekali di rantau kita. Dan walaupun beliau sendiri tidak membicara tentang sekolah, tentang satu sekolah, sebab pada zaman beliau tidak wujud, sekolah itu masih belum wujud. Tapi selepas beberapa dekad, ya, Syed Alatas mempunyai beberapa mahasiswa yang telah menjadi sarjana, dan mereka sendiri punyai beberapa mahasiswa yang telah menjadi sarjana, dan satu tradisi telah muncul, satu tradisi yang berpunca daripada pemikiran Syed Alatas, dan wujudnya tradisi itu adalah apa yang kita merujuk sebagai satu sekolah. Berarti bukan, yang saya maksudkan dengan sekolah bukan satu institusi, ya, tetapi satu tradisi yang diturunkan dari generasi ke generasi, yang berasaskan kepada satu pendekatan dalam mana ilmu kolonial dikupas, dikritik, dan mempunyai satu tanggapan terhadap ilmu kolonial itu, ya, yang ingin membebaskan diri daripada minda terbelenggu. Ya, itu yang dimaksudkan dengan ilmu mandiri, dan tradisi yang berpunca daripada usaha itu disebut sebagai sekolah ilmu mandiri. Yeah, so as I was saying, we have in the Malay world a school of autonomous knowledge which emerged from the writings of started from the writings of Syed Alatas, but he had many students who became scholars, and they had students who also became scholars, and now there is a fourth generation of scholars, of students rather, of graduate students at the National University of Singapore. I forgot to say, when I was saying in Bahasa just now, I forgot to say that Syed Alatas, we can say, kita bisa mengatakan bahwa sekolah ilmu mandiri berasal bukan dari Singapura, bukan dari Malaysia, bukan hanya dari Indonesia, tapi dari Nusantara ini. Ya, sebab sekolah ilmu mandiri ini yang berasaskan kepada pemikiran Syed Alatas. Syed Alatasnya sendiri lahir di Bogor, ya, di Hindia Belanda. Lepas itu pindah ke Amsterdam untuk belajar di Amsterdam. Lepas itu pulang bukan ke Indonesia tapi ke Malaysia, menjadi warga Malaysia, dan lepas itu pindah ke Singapura dan mendirikan jurusan pengkajian Melayu, dan di sana muncul satu sekolah, ya, yang kita menamakan sekolah ilmu mandiri. So Syed Alatas, as I said, studied in Indonesia, was born in Indonesia, spent part of his childhood in Indonesia. Later on, after finishing his studies in the Netherlands at the University of Amsterdam, went to Malaysia, became a Malaysian, but ended up teaching at the National University of Singapore in the Department of Malay Studies. So the School of Autonomous Knowledge, Sekolah Ilmu Mandiri, is rooted in the whole region, not just in Singapore. But most of his research was done in Singapore at the Department of Malay Studies, where he had some students who themselves became scholars, and they had trained students from Malaysia, from Singapore, from Indonesia, So the people who have been influenced by Sekolah Ilmu Mandiri are found everywhere in the region. And maybe we can say that this is the only school of social science that has developed in the Malay world. It's a sociological school of social science, but it's interesting that the school developed not in a sociology department, but rather in the Department of Malay Studies. So our goal really is to develop autonomous knowledge, ilmu yang mandiri. That means knowledge that is not theoretically, conceptually dependent on on others, but that is rooted in our own tradition, rooted in our own ideas, that takes our thinkers seriously, and which is also interested in Western ideas, but in an autonomous manner, not in the manner of the captive mind. I think I will end there, and hope we can have a discussion. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam.